All right, everything. Make sure that this is counting here. All right, I'm almost there. All right. Okay, perfect. Everything is working. All right,
Oh, this is
Frank.
live. You should have told
Oh,
me I would have
uh,
advertised it.
oh, okay. Oh, yeah, we are. Well, you know what? Our live stream is not that incredibly big. I guess it would have been bigger if you had advertised it. That's fine. No,
Yeah.
I didn't. I was a little bit down to the wire on this one. Sorry, I wasn't totally as prepared as usual. So anyway, we're recording, you know, and it'll be out there. So anyhow, Frank Jacob, thanks for being on Radiant Creators once again. It's always great to have you on. And Frank Jacob has a new webinar. And Frank Jacob has really been kind of, well, pioneering like a new type of webinar, because Frank Jacob used to put out, quite the productions, and those took time to create, and they're all wonderful. But now it seems like Frank can stay up to date and keep putting out info in the webinar format, and it works, and the production value of the webinars is excellent as well. I think this is your number two, right? Like major webinar, I think, and it's Ancient X Files from the Plaza Matrix.
It's number 4, Craig.
Number 4. Sorry.
That's okay. You're excused, But yeah, it's number 4. I've been doing these now. It's just my 3rd year of doing them. So they, as you say, they've become a new expression form for me, as apart from film, which, as you accurately stated, is very time consuming. And we still do those, but they do take, they can take years.
Yeah.
Finish, and there are some things that just they can't that can't wait for years. So yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely moving fast now. So having a faster, way to produce does make sense, and so that's right. 4. Well, I guess I'm just so thinking about the time capsule for the future past, which is the last one. Well, not the last one, but previous to this one. Those two are just so epic. I was kind of just seeing 2 in my mind, even though there's 4. And now that I think back, yeah, you're right. There's 4. So anyway, Ancient X Files in the plasma matrix, and it has 4 parts. And I like to just kind of go through each of those parts and give people kind of a teaser and say, hey, go get this this webinar that Frank Jacob did, because it's great. I've watched it a few times now, and it's truly one of those webinars or videos, any form of gleaning knowledge, whether it's reading or webinar, it doesn't matter. That you have to go through a few times and then put it away for a while, and then go back later and find that you'll see things that you didn't even see the first couple times you watched it. So how is Ancient X Files and the Plasma Matrix being received? It's been out for a little bit now.
Well, it's still pretty fresh, but yeah, it's I mean, the thing is, people are I've gotten a lot of people writing me saying it's really turned their world on its head, but they love it because I don't present just simple channeled works or theories. I actually present academic works that are based on multiple disciplines, which include mythology, science, my own experience, written books, things, literature, things that are out there that have been basically circulating for a long time that have gotten lost. So I find a lot of nuggets and bind them all together, because it's all about trying to posit a hypothesis, but also back it up with something that people can then check on their own. So I'm not just saying that, I've just come back from Venus, and I met with the Council of 12, and here's the message, and you can't check it. You can't falsify it, is the word that people use in the academic circles. And if it's non-falsifiable, to me, it's virtually useless. And I've kind of taken that hard-nosed position now in the last couple of years, because I've started in this filmmaking genre as a professional, but working on, industry kind of level stuff, or sports, or things that are kind of like non-esoteric, even though my background and my life and my own personal mind and my own personal approach is very much metaphysical, I never brought that into the medium until the last 10, 12 years. I started with Packing for Mars, Solar Revolution, Klaus Donna Chronicles. We started beginning to introduce those themes into the audiovisual medium on a certain level of professionalism, because I felt at the time that I was working in editing and filmmaking, the internet was clogged with a lot of really bad quality materials that were in that genre, and I wanted to do something about that and create and add my level of skill to that genre to give it more meat, because that there's this kind of subliminal feeling that if you see something and it really looks crappy, it's like, well, it can't be real kind of thing. Maybe that's changing a little bit now with since the lockdowns. People have accepted really gritty quality video stuff on the internet, so that's changed a little bit, but that again opened up things for me to explore. So yeah, people are, I have discussion forums, and I have comment spaces under the videos, and that are part of the webinars, and I get a lot of great comments and really, really positive. I mean, I have yet to receive anything negative. And someone maybe have written and said, well, if is that really all coming out of the Nag Hammadi? Like, come on, right? So I explain what the sources are and how some of these ideas are formulated, and put something behind it, so it's not just like my word against somebody else's. And I'm always open to people entering the discussion and posing questions or posing doubt and saying, well, this can't be, and then we get into an interesting discussion. I'm totally on board with that, and I think that's really important when you're talking about this kind of material, especially some of the things in this new webinar. I'm getting into things now that I've come the full spectrum of completely opening my mind to the experience of experiencers, I guess that's what they're called, that are involved in secret space programs and and paranormal experiences, and I just let them tell their story. And I felt that was an important part of my form of expression, and also of the genre, to be able to let people tell their story. And now I'm kind of moving into the direction of, okay, well, we've heard the stories. Now let's look at some of the source materials. And this is where this word falsifiable is so important now, because I've realized now that I'm throwing out things that are not falsifiable, because I've heard all the stories. I've maybe not all the stories, but believe me, I've heard something in every genre by somebody who's at the top of their in the field, or is well known, or has a crazy story, and I've listened to it. I've heard it pretty much, the full spectrum of what's going on out there in the secret space program or mind control space. And I need more now. I need more than that. I need to go back to the source materials and look at where maybe some of these ideas came from. And lo and behold, you find out that these things that are being experienced nowadays in the world, especially in the paranormal field, they haven't just been happening for the last 10 years or 15 or 20 years. It turns out they've been happening for thousands of years. So yeah. I look at those sources, and let's look at what happened 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. And you realize that, okay, well, this is nothing new. This has already been put out into the field. So are the stories that we're hearing today, are they really original, or are they just carbon copies of plagiarized ideas that somebody put a spin on to get some attention, maybe sell a few books? But do they really have any value? Do they bring anything new to the table that helps humanity? Because it's really ultimately about helping us to go further than we are right now. If we keep treading on the same mill, like I don't know how many more secret space program stories I can listen to that are going nowhere. It's like, so what? If you went to Venus and Mars and all these places and met with all these councils, what does it have? How is it affecting us on Earth, and what are they doing about it? Has anyone ever brought back a formula, even something simple as a chemical formula from one of their extraterrestrial excursions, meeting up with the High Council of Arcturians or Pleiadians, and brought that molecule and that formula back to Earth and have it change radically our life and create like a plastic that is harder than aluminum and decays after 1 year and completely disappears in the environment? Things like that. No, simple things like that, right? You would think that somebody would bring something back that would change and help humanity, but do they? No, they never do. So therefore, it's just a psychological experience, and we are entitled to question the sources of those informations. I mean, and I'll just say one more thing that
Yeah.
just by, I by fluke, I was listening to one of John Nolan's, talks, right? He's out there every day, right? I don't know how he does it. He's just, amazing, like he's a machine.
Mm-hmm.
But he was talking about how it came to his attention that the whole Charlie Kirk story was part of a narrative from a film back from 19, I
Yes.
believe, 7, right? And you realize that the same names, the same methods, the same stuff keeps reappearing. Well, my work actually shows you where those things, those patterns recur and how far they go back. And it shows you that this stuff, for the most part, is an archontic element, because the archons are mimetic. They can't invent. They're not creative. They just keep reinventing and reinventing. And so it's no surprise to me to hear that Charlie Kirk narrative has just been repeated over again, because they keep repeating the same patterns. And really, it makes you question really what's behind it all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that movie, I think, was called Snake Eyes. And
Yeah.
I like the actor who's in that too. Oh, but I forget who he is right now.
Nicolas Cage, right?
Yeah, Nicolas Cage, who's definitely an
Yeah.
esoteric character himself. I mean, right there's a portal to the other side. And
Yeah, he played some awesome roles. That guy.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't like Hellrider? Come on, Anyway, so, but the thing that got me about that, I'd never seen Snake Eyes, and then of course I saw the little clips that people have posted, and it got me. Okay, the movie and the theme. I was like, well, maybe somebody being shot in the neck. I'm like, well, Nicolas Cage has shot people in the neck in other movies. This time he gets shot in the neck. Well, it's kind of a common theme. Maybe that's not it, But then when the woman he was with was wearing a white kind of pantsuit, just like Charlie Kirk's wife was, I went, oh man, that's it. Now the coincidences have reached the impossible level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing about that whole Charlie Kirk thing is, not that we want to go in there in that direction.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
I'm just saying that what you find out is that narrative has so many holes, and
Yes.
you're finding that one of the themes that I talk about in my webinars is that people get the story, the narrative. It's about this framing of the narrative, and they get caught by a narrative, and the story's being told. And they follow the story that's being told rather than looking at, wait a minute, this part and this part and this part does not fit at all. Why don't we answer that first? But they don't do that. And with the Charlie Kirk, we have another laboratory, another experiment live that we can work with that shows there's at least a half a dozen serious or more incongruencies which just can't be true if that narrative is true. And why aren't we talking about that? And nobody is talking about. Only a very few people are talking about it. And and you realize then that it's about cloning. Behavioral cloning is the word, right? It's behavioral cloning. People are used to behavior. They're acting in a way. Their behavior is cloning the behavior of that narrative, and it's spreading. It's a mass entrainment, where people get into this narrative, and the narrative is completely false. But because everybody's following it, it's kind of like, well, they're into it and they're into it. Must be true. I mean, Trump's saying it, and JD Vance is, and they had a huge ceremony. I mean,
which was
62,000 people showed up in Arizona for a man I've never heard of before, honestly. But now he's the new Martin Luther King. Okay, that's probably a little bit revealing my ignorance of the conservative talk, political talk scene. But honestly, if you aren't into the political podcasting scene, you wouldn't know of this guy. In fact, I don't know anybody over in Germany, I can tell you that for sure, that knows this guy. But I'll tell you right now, everybody I know knows this guy, right? And it's like this guy's become an icon. He's become a new symbol that is part of the behavioral cloning trick that the archons play on society. And that's all I'll say to that effect. We can get back into more.
Oh yeah. And the political and the narrative cloning makes me sort of think of egregores. So you have this kind of plasma monster, this egregore, which is just waiting to be activated, and it gets more powerful every time it's replicated. And so that's where you see the Solodinsky and Rules for Radicals, page 75. He said the action is the reaction. of
Yeah.
events, and so boom, they just fired that egregore up. And yeah, it is the archonic cloning. And yeah, we'll definitely get off little Mr. Kirk, but I will mention that South Park season 27 has been amazing. And as far as they took a new turn. It's amazing. It's been around for 27 seasons, but South Park, it's funny. Okay, I'll admit it. I laugh at that stuff. So, but their last season, season 27, is political satire. It is something which they just never have exactly done before. It's just different. It's off the rails, so it's unusual, the season itself. And then episode, I think it was 3 or 4, was about Charlie Kirk, and
Before or after?
before, at least a week or 2 weeks before, you know, it was literally an episode about Charlie Kirk and who he was and what he did, because it's definitely something you can create a satire about. So there you go. You see these
Well, it
things
was
in
the
motion.
beginnings of the making of the myth, my friend.
Yeah, it was exactly. So, well, also with your material that you're putting out, I think it's really with the quality of the webinars and the work before. I think one of the things that it definitely combats is, as we're calling it right now, AI slop farming on YouTube and such.
Oh yeah.
We're really getting actual original content is becoming obscured on YouTube.
Yeah.
You have to. Erin, the other Radiant Creator at Radiant Creator headquarters here, she's an artist and she, has her work out there. And print shops actually have, they'll certify that something's not AI, because that's how devious it's all become. People put out works of art that are AI for prints, and they didn't lend a hand to it whatsoever. So we really are having to discern and then actually have like certifications, not AI. It's beyond belief. So YouTube is getting almost like so diluted that it's difficult. It creates more discernment and effort needed. Wait a second, this isn't real.
Yeah.
So you're putting out original content and it's not on YouTube. People have to seek it out, pay for it, and get it. And do you think we're going to have to start maybe pulling away from those public platforms a little bit to get away from all the slop farming, as it's called?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I would probably agree there, because I've, myself, when I do research, if I, for example, I was starting to look into the 3i Atlas thing a little bit, even though I hadn't really paid any attention. I'm like, what is all the big deal about, right? So I looked into it and I watched about, I don't know, 5 or 6 videos, and I realized every one of those videos was simply an AI voiceover.
Yes.
And it was just getting obnoxious. And it was the same story, and it was repeated, and the videos go on for like 20 minutes, and they say the first thing, they say it all in 5 minutes, and then they just keep repeating it 4 times. And you realize, man, this is just a waste. This is an insult to the intelligence of humanity. And you realize that the whole 3i Atlas thing is just, again, one of those narratives. One of the first things I think anybody who studies alternative storylines and narratives in the world comes across is the idea of the distractors. There's things out there that are happening that are catching a lot of attention. Like, let's just say Charlie Kirk and also 3i Atlas, and they just grab your attention and everyone's fixated on them. Well, when that happens, it's like the old magic trick, right? That's exactly what magicians do when they're trying to bring a trick across. They get your attention somewhere, and then you don't notice what's going on behind their back or in the corner of the peripheral of the room or something. So this is how they trick us also in political narratives. And so, while the whole Charlie Kirk thing was going on, Trump was over in the UK, signing a huge artificial intelligence bill that would fund the UK to the tune of $300 billion, right? I mean, that's no small thing. I mean, imagine in the old days, maybe 5 years ago, $300 billion was a lot of money, man. It was like, nowadays, like 300 billion, that's not a trillion. It's like, can't be that much, right? So people have lost complete perspective on everything. And they've lost perspective on science too, because science has been undermined with a lot of fake science that has gotten to the point where people just don't trust even legitimate science any longer, because they just think, well, that's just what they're trying to tell us, because, there really is Tartaria and all this other stuff going on. And, I mean, they just, there really are those free electric domes on top of the houses. And I mean, they really want to believe that stuff, even though you can show them 1,000 ways why that's just impossible and never happened. it doesn't matter. They want to believe it because they don't trust science and they don't trust the narratives out there anymore. And they're distracted by all the garbage that's out there. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear you say that about my webinars, and they are absolutely authentic. I do not use an AI version of myself, and I refuse to use an AI German translation of my voice. Actually, that's probably a drawback for my German friends because I end up subtitling it. In fact, I'm working on it right now. I've just finished the third part in German subtitles, and it's a tedious process. I go through the entire timeline again in English to make sure the English subtitles are perfect and pristine, and then I translate it over into German, and then I go through it all over again to make sure the German ones are pristine as well. And that just is like a headache, but I mean, it's worth it because the quality is there. And the other benefit is, I remember, like you say, you watched it a couple times and you get new things. Well, I myself learned from my own webinars, so, as much as I've compiled all this stuff and put it together, when I watch it a second time for the translation, or maybe even a third time, I'm like, that's true. I hit that section is really cool. I get locked right into it. And then I even do some supplemental additional research bouncing off of what I, like I was just doing something on the moon, I mean, I was looking into the moon, like the whole Ritalin thing, that the fact that these stones got peeled off of the face of the moon facing the earth, right, because of the plasma cosmos and the electric universe. That would be exactly what would happen when there's a polarity of anode cathode between the earth and the moon. It would create an automatic pull, and it would really literally rip that regolith is what it's called, off the surface of the moon. That's why one side of the moon facing us is like almost naked, and the other side, if you go around back, is like boulders, and it's regolith everywhere. It's got huge, it's very uneven. Why? Because well, the moon it settled in that position because of certain laws of physics. Of course, it requires you to believe in certain laws of physics for you to accept that story. But it makes sense within the way it's explained, and it makes sense within the Sophianic narrative that Sophia literally made the moon as a vanity mirror for herself. So I was digging into that material to try and find, some more material to explore in that direction. So yeah, I mean, the more you watch them, the more you get out of them. They really are like courses, and they really should be like springboards, and they really should open up discussions, I would think. I think this new one kind of stuns a lot of people because I'm bringing in so many wild things that span all the way from a new cosmology, which is based on plasma, which people know very little about. We hear people talk about plasma, and we hear people talk about the electric universe, but has anyone ever come along and kind of really explained it nicely so that everybody knows really what the heck it's all about? That's what I wanted to do. And then after you do that, you kind of realize, okay, that sort of changes the scope of the rest of the history of the planet. And if we're going to lay the Sophianic mysteries on top, the Gnostic story, the Gnostic truth and stuff on top of it, then this opens up a whole new avenue of study.
Oh, it certainly does. And so, yes, Ancient X-Files and the Plasma Matrix, it does have 4 parts: primordium, convergence, and remanence. And then the last one, let me go here, the last one, what's the last one called?
Cumulus.
Yeah, cumulus. So we'll go through, let's go through a couple of highlights in each part, that I could ask you about. And we definitely won't give too much away because, well, we really couldn't. It has to be seen, but we'll cover that. No spoilers, everybody, but we'll cover some parts of it. So one last thing is on your, on the videos for this, each section, the comment section is very, very alive. And that's something I haven't even gotten through all the comments. There's far too many. So the comment section, very, very alive, which is nice. I love the interaction. So in Primordium, one line that got me, these are just the descriptions for each one that are below the section. But you mentioned, but the true nature of reality is reasserting itself. So the true nature of reality is reasserting itself. So what does that sentence mean?
Well, for example, like let's just look at a word in respect to that makes that's connected to that, and that word is the matrix. And I look at one of the things about reality that I'm trying to say here is that we've been misled, and well, through archontic simulation tactics, which is to try and overlay our reality with mimicry, with things that are seemingly real or copied of reality, and to try and pull people toward the archon world, right? Because the archons can't enter our world. So a word like matrix, for example, sometimes it's the use of words, and all I hear out there is, oh, the matrix, we got to get out of the matrix, escaping from the matrix, and the matrix has you, right? Well, where does that come from? And I actually go into the root of that word, and you find out that that's a complete bastardization of the true meaning of that word, because matrix actually is a word that symbolizes the mother. And it's the that cold, that dark and warm and mysterious place that we emerge from, that supports life and that nurtures us and brings us into the reality, and so I think it's really important to kind of understand how we've been pulled away from reality, in the sense that the regular things around us that have been kind of twisted and changed, and the meanings have been changed. Like another word that's really big out there now is simulation. Everyone says we're living in a simulation, and the archons said it was a simulation. Well, no, not really. You find out that that the archon narrative and the idea of what the Gnostics said about the archons has been, again, totally twisted by lazy researchers that don't look at the true teachings of the Gnostics, the Sethian Gnosticism. They end up going for something called Valentinian Gnosticism. And that is a sort of a form of, like, if you look at the Nag Hammadi source documents, these 52 codices, unfortunately, the first book, the most complete book in the whole collection, is called the Apocryphon of James. And the Apocryphon of James is not a Gnostic document. And because you read it and it seems like to fit into Christian and Old Testament and New Testament, there's elements of the biblical narrative directly in it. People that come across it have the impression then that the Gnostics were these early Christians. But that's not true. And you wouldn't know that unless you'd really delve deeply enough into the material to make the distinction between the fact that that is not a Gnostic document and what follows, and what documents are really Gnostic documents. And there's a mishmash. There's even documents, it's so nonsensical. There's documents that are both Sethian and Valentinian mixed together. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that there was a witch hunt that was going on to get rid of the Gnostics at that time, at the formative years, 2,000 years ago, of the church. The church fathers were, Irenaeus is one famous man he held trials and courtroom procedures to literally oust and kill or destroy or whatever he could to the Gnostic material, including the Sophianic narrative, which is probably the most dangerous narrative ever to be out there for the church. So that's why the church undertook everything it could to eliminate that narrative. And if you don't really spend the time to get into that, or if you get off on the wrong foot of research and you stick to one vein of research, then you're not going to be able to make that distinction, and you're going to get sucked into the false version of Gnosticism, which is the majority of the versions of Gnosticism that are out there right now. A lot of people are claiming they know what Gnosticism is, or they're always making these Gnostic comparisons to simulation, and that the Archon, the Lord Archon Yaldabaoth created the world, this fake world for us to be trapped in, right? This is not true. This story is not true. But that's what I was trying to get at with respect to reality, if that makes any sense to you.
Oh, it makes complete sense. And I think that people who are going to be drawn to the material will understand that line. It's a great way for it to start out. And I think most people who would on the intuitive level that they get it, they're going to say, I get it. It's going to speak to people. It spoke to me. I was like, oh, I get it, And you mentioned The Matrix, and that's the thing. The movie The Matrix, which I think it's cool. Everybody loves it. Come on, we all like Neo.
Yeah.
But
Classic.
Yeah, and I've heard many people refer to it as like a Gnostic, sort of story. Yeah. But the one thing about being trapped in the Matrix is that, well, for one thing, it's a movie, right? And at the same time, what people may miss is that, when you're the one, you're free. you can create what you want in the matrix. Now it becomes your playground to manifest in. It no longer has that, like, power over you per se. And like the whole point of life is to wake other people up, unplug, you know
Yes. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
it has, it has both. It has both of the themes in it. Again, it's because on the one hand, yes, it's saying that Neo is a singularity, and
Hmm.
that's what we're trying to teach people with Gnosticism. That you're a singularity. You're unique, and when you realize what you are as a singularity, then the influence of the archontic overlay, what they called hell in those old documents, which is translated into simulation, which is why so many people use it. It doesn't mean
Mm.
that they created a simulation that we're living in, like a projected world, a hologram or something. It just means that they use simulation tactics to overlay
Mm.
reality and pull us away from perceiving reality as it is. And so singularity, being the singularity, is someone that has this ability. When you realize you are a singularity and you realize that you are a direct character, you're a main character in the plot of the movie, of your film that's in collaboration with the dreaming of Sophia, then you have license and agency to take that as far as you want. And the other aspect of the film that's the wrong message, of course, is that we're trapped in the matrix, right?
Yes.
Because they really make it a point that we're living in this dream world completely. And on in some ways, that analogy is true, because the more people that allow themselves to be lured into the simulated overlay of the archontic projections, they
Yes.
really are living in a fake world. But the thing is, that doesn't mean that they don't have access to the real world around them at any moment. But you need to understand what reality is and what the real connection to your Mother Earth, to Sophia is. And you need to and you need to develop methods for you to get in touch and set up that connection with the planetary animal mother, so that you actually do have orientation. And once you do that, and that's why I think this is such an important message. Once you've recognized that, then it doesn't matter where you are and what scenario you are in. Even if it's a completely contrived or archontic one, you don't get fooled by it, because you sense the frequency of it, and it's not real. That,
Hmm.
like, if people say stuff that, so I met with Sophia, and I'm the embodiment of Sophia, and she told me this, and you're listening to the message. If you are in tune, you'll know. No, you'll know if it's true or not, because you sense it in a way that you resonate with it authentically. And that's the whole point of gnosis, is to know, right? To know that connection. It's
Mm.
not believing. The Gnostics were not about believing stuff. They were about having direct experience. And they talked
Yes.
about how, in an animistic world, everything is material. There's no separation between spirit and matter. There's no prison world that we're locked in, and we have this little spark of God, and we can get out of it. No, everything is material. Everything that we're living in is real material. From the DNA that forms the blueprint of our bodies, to the connection of our DNA into the plasmic realm, which is the Akasha field, which is invisible to us in the denser form of our being, but it's still material. Just like plasma is material substance, it's pre-matter. It's the protons, the electrons, and the neutrons, before they form into something and congeal. It's like before the dewdrop. It's the
Yes.
moisture in the air before the dewdrop is formed. The dewdrops is us, and the dewdrops in the universe is a very, very, very minuscule amount of what is out there compared to the mist, which is the Akashic record.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. And so really the matrix being, I guess you could say, like the womb of Sophia, when you're Neo, when you're that singularity, when you have gnosis, you know, that is where we want to be, versus like the simulation idea, which that's where really hell really is. And that simulation, for instance, that's kind of like the Charlie Kirk-averse that we're living in right now. There's your
Yeah.
simulation. You just get
Yeah.
stuck in this never-ending
It's a
simulation.
simulation, but parallel to the simulation is the reality of the 7 or 8 questions we could ask that would destroy that
Yes.
narrative immediately. If the masses were to say, no, we're not going with the narrative, we want to have these questions answered first, it would be over. It was like,
Yeah.
the simulation crumbles, and then you're looking at reality, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, reality is a harder picture to digest for most people, which is another analogy in the Matrix film, which is probably accurate because it's a little extreme, but they show us the real world, right? And it's dark, and
Yes.
the sky's broken, and unfortunately, that's twisted on its head because reality is beautiful.
Yes.
And Sophia, the one thing about Sophia and the Aeons is that they thrive on beauty, and what they create are beautiful things. There is nothing ugly except what the archons try to impose on our brains, right? So the idea that in that film reality would be so ugly is an archontic mimetic version of a turnaround and complete inversion of the reality that is reality.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. 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 And and along with that, maybe one truth in it is where Neo, when he's kind of being rebuilt, and he asks Morpheus, why do my eyes hurt? And he says, because you've never used them before.
Yeah.
So maybe the act of actually seeing reality for the first time is difficult.
Yeah,
But
no,
it is beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what I meant is, I guess what I left off on that last part was that it's painful to look at reality sometimes, and that ties in beautifully with it. That analogy of the eyes you've never used before,
Yeah.
because looking at the truth, it brings a lot of stuff up, like cognitive dissonance. A lot of emotions come up, a lot of anger comes up, a lot of like, well, I've been fooled all this time, I didn't believe, and then the problem of taking it to your peers who then laugh at you because they haven't had their awakening yet, right? So then you have to deal with all of that, right? So reality can be very hard for people, but once you break through and you bear with it and you see, really the truth, then that is a very beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
just go out into nature and look at all the little elements, in a I don't know, 5 square meters of space. Maybe it's beside a stream or something, and watch the insects and the birds and the plants and the water and listen to the sounds, and you realize that complex picture right there, that is that's really absolutely real, is so magical. But we don't
Yes.
give it any thought because we don't spend much time in nature. And most of us, and especially now in our modern era, we've been lured into the IT world, which is a mimetic version of nature. I mean, you have it on your screenshot right there behind us
Yeah.
right now, right?
Yeah.
So we're not sitting in nature, we're imitating nature. And I think this is something that's going lost. And one of my last talks I did at Arlington just last month, actually this month, 3 weeks ago, I think, was about the beautiful trap. And I was talking about specifically those things about how in the future, in the not too distant future, when everyone's on universal basic income and joblessness is everywhere, and they're given, a kind of kit from the government. Well, here's your goggles, and here's your phone, and
Yes.
here's your CBDCs, and here's your 30 square meter or 90 square foot apartment, and you can trip off and go into the virtual world, and everyone's going to be kind of sitting there, and what's going to happen is their bodies, I even have a slide up on that. I had a slide showing atrophied bodies, and people that that aren't really nourishing themselves anymore. They've lost touch, and the nature is beginning to creep into the walls and take back the building because nobody's taking care of it, which is a good thing for nature, of course, but a terrible thing for humanity and collaboration with nature.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. And there's that movie, whatever it was, gosh, something. But the little robot, and then you have the eventually he finds the people, and they're all these fat things that are all on mobility scooters, and Wally, yeah, And when I saw that, that was very difficult. I went, man, I wish this wasn't the future. Well, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, but that was very, very poignant, very, very poignant. And then in the next section, convergence, you mentioned the telestai, and who are they?
Well, they were the Magi, actually. The Magi's were the original, actually the original Aryan people that came out of the Persian area and settled into Persia, and were the first shamans. The ones that began to pursue, the fullness of the human realms, and part of that fullness is delving into for example, looking at the substances that Sophia provided us with, there are some substances which are entheogenic. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes.
Entheogenic
Yep.
substances, which were gifted to humanity, to the Anthropos. Maybe not for everybody, but for those shamans who are prepared to learn from the plant teachers, it allows you to see the background, the fundament of the universe. And many people who had those experiences, those they have these really incredible direct entries into a conversation with Sophia. That's what these telestai were doing. They were entering into what they called the organic light, and they broke through and were able to make a direct contact with the planetary animal mother intelligence, the divine intelligence that made the earth. And through their interaction over really centuries, this isn't just something fly by night, Jay-Z Knight, channeling Rampa.
Yeah.
It's a like a lineage, you could say, of scholarly shamans who pursued alternate reality behind the dewdrops, the mist, as I made that analogy before,
Yeah.
that were exploring that connection, and they were able to reconstruct that story of Sophia's fall, or plunge, as they call it, from the pleroma. And what they discovered in their shamanic journeys literally is, now you could call it physics in form of story, because what they were describing and how they described this all happening, and where these aeons, these, of which Sophia is one, where they live is in the center of these galaxies as plasmic torrents, as giant snake-like, plasma energies that are intertwining and living in this area of concentrated energy. That information is only now beginning to become recognized with modern science. So now we're realizing that, lo and behold, this is true. We do have these plasmic torrents, and we do have this thing called dusty complex plasma, which is what we see. And we do have the other states of plasma which fit into the narrative of how some torrent could literally rip out of the center of the galaxy and charge into the dusty particles in the arms of the galaxy, in this case the third arms of the galaxy, and an area called M42, which people identify as Orion as well. That's where Sophia slammed into as this plasmic energy torrent. And when she did that, she altered matter, and she created a whole series of events. Amongst one was, of course, the creation of the archons inadvertently, because it was an accident. And the other was as a result of her desire and her care and love for her anthropine experiment, the humanities experiment, which had gone awry 9 times. She wanted to figure out why, and she was so concerned that she literally lost it. She lost it into the arms of the galaxy, and she became part of the experiment. A totally novel thing that had never happened before, and that set in motion a series of novel events. And that resulted in Sophia ultimately transforming directly into the earth as the best solution for her to provide that habitat for humanity that would provide the best chances of it making the leap that it needs to make in its evolution. And the idea of what actually the human genome is not something which is written in stone. It's a template for divine consciousness to explore matter and expand, of course, into the matter element, the dewdrop aspect of the universe. And so that whole story is what they filtered out of their direct experience with the animal planetary intelligence, and they wrote that stuff down. I mean, there's literally, you can't even begin to imagine the loss, because part of the materials that they gathered, of course, were assembled in something that many know as the Alexandria Library.
Yes.
And there were many other libraries, but in the time that the Telestai, the Magi, were around, they had set up all these mystery schools in that area of the world, and there were hundreds of them, and they were the first teachers. They were the ones that, aside from the branch that was deeply involved in mysticism, which was basically, also I should mention, not just men in this case, but it was an equal man and woman configuration. There's even remnants of the, that have surfaced in Greek mythological depictions from that time that show the man-woman connection, connected, of course, to the snake, the serpent, which is representing of the torrent, the plasmic torrent, which represents Sophia, right? So it just shows you that the serpent made its way back into the Bible when it was, taken by the church fathers. And how does the serpent appear in the Bible? Is it Sophia who made the earth? No, it's actually this evil being, Lucifer, who tempts Eve into something that creates a whole, sets in motion all this horrible stuff that leads to where we are now. A complete hijacking of the true narrative that was captured through direct experience by the telestai. But anyway, they were putting that, not just that information together, they also set up all these schools. So they were teachers of language, of writing. They were the first people that actually brought, these higher skills of humanity into the world, starting about 6,000 years ago.
Yeah, and when you get into the Bible and you actually look at what did the serpent, the snake, say to Eve, I've always liked that part because it seems like he was saying, "Hey, look, you might be God, you might actually be your own, you might be the one, you might be Neo. If you bite this and you eat it and like nothing bad happens, then right, Anyway, it's quite beguiling what the serpent was saying, and I think that." It's worth a little skimming of the Bible there for that part.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, Irenaeus is one of the sources you find a lot of the true Gnostic messages in that talk about Sophia, that actually you realize, oh, that's where because they had to bring them to prosecute them. They had to actually leak out elements of their story into the court records. You said Sophia fell from the pleroma and her tears are the ocean, and her, her dramatic emotions and feelings of despair are the weather. And yeah, exactly. So we have these elements of, everything is material. And that's another example of that. And the thing is, they had to leave that in, but what they did is they turned it around. So you have something like, for example, bloodlines. That's something I think you caught in the webinar as well, right? The use of bloodlines. It's another way that the church takes the story. I mean, it's not directly written as bloodlines, but it's implied in that there's lineage. And if you look at the Old Testament, lineage is lines, blood lines, lineage, bloodlines. And so they took the idea of lines and they turned them into lineage, of genetic lineage and bloodlines, when in fact the actual lines that the Gnostics are talking about are now understood as Birkeland currents that we now know through the electric universe and the plasma cosmology that were discovered 100 years ago by Alfvén, right? I mean, we now know that the lines are these networks of plasma that are going through the entire universe. And so when the male aspect of mankind reunited with females, it was along those lines. And I tell that whole story. We don't have to go into it here. We don't want to give it away. But that whole story is told. So if you really want to know what that lines is all about, just what I'm saying here is the church takes those things and they've twisted them, they've turned them upside down, they've weaponized them because it's now become a sinful thing, right? And so that the earth had to be, washed over, the whole flood narrative, right? Which isn't original to the Old Testament, by the way. It's another thing that the Hebrews plagiarized from earlier works. So a lot of these mythologies, in fact, there's nothing in the Bible that's original that they didn't cop and plagiarize from someplace else, except for one element. And that element was that Abraham made a deal with Melchizedek, and they were chosen as the special selected humans that were God's selected people, right? That part is complete invention. But of course, that part works in their favor better than anything else. And that narrative is supported to this very day. I mean, just look at what's happening with Netanyahu right now. Doesn't think that? I mean, I've showed my previous webinar actual conversations between, Schneerson, who was the head of Lubavitch, Chabad Lubavitch, or cult, as I call them, a sect of hyper Zionist, teachers that are holding that ideology to this very day. And they were, and there's Netanyahu asking advice from this cult leader about the Messiah, which is a complete fabrication that goes back to those early days, because they were waiting for that Messiah. Another thing I've built into the webinar. They were waiting for that Messiah 2,000 years ago, my friends. And guess what? He was just around the corner. He was just in the air. He was going to come down, right? And guess what? He didn't, because he doesn't exist, and because this
Yes.
story is another way of turning the narrative of the singularity that you are it. You and I, we are it. We are
Mhm.
the singularities. We're not. There is no Messiah from outside. There is no outside that's legitimate. The only outside is the inside. But to
Yes.
get to the outside, you need to go through the inside first, and you need to understand who your true, source is and where we truly come from. And that's something that these telestai documented.
Yeah, and that definitely changes our vision of what is a shaman. When you think about, wow, okay, that changes it. I mean, they're not just playing with herbs and healing people, which is something which is nice too,
Well,
but
there's all
it
kinds of
goes much,
shamans.
yeah,
There's
it
all
goes much
kinds of shamans.
deeper.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it definitely deepens our vision of an understanding of what that is. So I actually think that I couldn't tell you when I started. Maybe it's always been the case, but I think that what is a shaman? If you look at what the Telestai were, and then you consider that to be a shaman, like a Gnostic shaman, then I kind of feel like shamans have been made almost comical, or just sort of like new agey or something. Like what they are has been played down. It seems, like
sure.
art.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we should also point out that you don't have to be taking psychogenic substances to be a shaman.
yeah,
And not everybody, in fact, I'm sure they didn't continuously sit there and dope up on something. They didn't need to. And it's like anybody that has had a very deep, I had some very profound shamanic experiences when I was probably 18, 19 years old, like really far out, where I saw the construct of the mist, of how
yeah,
what's behind the universe, right, before it congeals, right. And it was enough information for me to deeply, profoundly, and affect my perception of reality after that point, moving forward, without having to take anything. I
yeah.
just, at that point, I made that. It was like click. Now I get it. And so now I view the world completely differently, and the idea of animistic reality makes much more sense if you've had that original experience. Now, some people get there without anything. Other people need it every time. I know a lot of people, but I think if you overdo it, you begin to lose your grounding. And grounding is important, because it really is about, we need to, the idea that everything is congealed is important. We would go insane if all of us were seeing, it's like a Kundalini experience every single moment of our lives. We would go nuts. We would go insane. Literally, we need to have the solidification, the
Yes.
dewdrop. The dewdrop is where it counts. Here in physical material reality, this is the end station. This is the destination. It's not to get away from here. This is something that people like even David Icke, they've got it completely wrong. I don't know why, because he should know better, but there's a lot of inconsistencies in his narrative, which I'm not going to razz him about, because he's done a lot of really good stuff to
Oh
help
yeah.
people awaken. But there are some aspects of his narrative which I just don't understand how he could be so off. But anyway, we don't need to go there. The point is, we need to realize that this is the destination, and anybody that's telling you we need to get off of here is infected by the archontic virus that's telling us that this is not Sophia. We're not living in Sophia's dream, on her body, on the back of her, literally inside of her body. We're in it. We're in the divine presence, because we're living on the surface of a divine being, of a living planetary being. And this isn't even just on a spiritual level. You can look at the work of Lovelock and Margulis. In the 70s, they brought up the Gaia hypothesis, which they did. She was a chemist, or she was a biologist, and he was a chemist, and they discovered that the Earth actually acts like it is a living being. And this is just purely from a scientific, dry, academic perspective, not even from any kind of shamanistic or spiritual perspective. The Earth actually does behave as if it's a living, breathing being. And that's something that is very profound and very wild. And once you realize that, then, I wish more people would realize it, because we're in this is one of the things the church damaged us with. They created this antagonistic relationship between mankind and nature. We had to battle the elements. We had to overcome nature, right? I mean, it's completely reversed again, turned on its head narrative. The pagans, the heretics, which, by the way, that word means only to choose, or the freedom to choose. They were the people that were living in touch with Sophia's actual, body. They were connected to the world, and they were living animistically. They didn't see, things in the world as random or outside of themselves. They perceived everything as being part of the living whole. And animals were teachers. If you had a visionary experience and you saw a certain animal, they knew that that animal was associated with previous people that had that experience with that animal, and that animal represented something. So their experience with nature was much more intimate. They would see animals and birds and plants and locations and energies and sky phenomenon as direct representations of their living immersion in the whole, rather than we're mankind and there's nature out there and we have to tame it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, ethnogens, hallucinogens, being something that is like required for shamanism or gnosis. Yeah, I understand where they can help, but I've always kind of questioned people who are, going for their, 100th.
Yeah.
Like this is like number 99 time I'm taking a trip to do ayahuasca, and you start thinking like, well, what are you, a hardhead? What do you
How long
need?
does it take you to get it, right?
Yeah, it's like, because
Yeah.
I've never done ayahuasca, but other hallucinogens. I'm like, to me, I did it when I was young as well. I guess I'm still young, but younger, and it's a workout. I mean, it's not always pleasant, and you kind of want to graduate that class, because once you get to animism, like you mentioned, and you realize like things are alive, that they're sentient, and
Yeah.
I think the books you mentioned, the book you mentioned, that's absolutely the case. But also Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a great book about like mechanics. They know that the machine is animistic. It is sentient, and
Yeah.
it's one of the things people who like weld, welders and stuff like that, they'll tell you, like when they hear about animism, they instantly get it. They go, this answers so much for me, because metal is alive.
Yeah.
It's like, and so once you get to that point of animism and you graduate hallucinogens, then you have the gnosis, the direct experience, the direct experience in like a meditative, disciplined way, and you don't have to be running around in cartoon land on hallucinogens, which to me is
Right.
preferable. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm. And so, see the next section. Oh, yeah, reminisce. How do you say that? Section 2.
Reminiscence.
Yes, reminiscence. I don't know why I can't speak. Oh, actually, that was the first. Wait a second. Yeah, and this kind of goes along with things that we've already been saying, but talking about. But in section 2, the ancient world was electrically alive. Is one of the first lines there, and once again, like the first line of each section really kind of nails it, but the ancient world was electrically alive. So the ancient world, what was happening that's different than right now?
Well, one
Yeah.
of the first things you need to, I guess, do to really get into this material is something that I call non-ordinary reasoning. Is like you have to set aside what you think you know or what you've learned so far about physics or relativity theory or whatever, gravity and things like that, like Big Bang theory. I'm asking you to embrace the concepts that are presented most accurately in something called the electric universe and in plasma cosmology. And when you do that, then your perspective of what happens and what's causation in the world and in the universe around you changes. And that's where it's much more. You realize that, and this is something I don't know if I talked about this in the last webinar, but about the laboratory experiments that were done by a Russian man called Sitovich, that he proved that plasma, even in the laboratory, begins to behave as if it's intelligent. And they've done experiments, many times, and they realized that plasma begins to connect to the substance, the mist, that it's connected to the akasha, the field, all on its own. And they proved that because they would pull the plug on the plasma experiment, and it would continue to exist. It would continue to move, and it would act like it's an intelligence. That's one of the first the tips that they received that made them realize that plasma is a carrier of consciousness. And
Yes.
extrapolating that outward, if a small laboratory ball of plasma can be conscious or behave like has an intelligence to it, then and we realize that the entire universe is made of plasma. then on a level of dimensions here, if we're talking about galaxy-sized plasmas, that the intelligence of something of that size, of course, is going to be vastly, unimaginatively powerful, and which of course fits beautifully with the Gnostic narrative in the Pleroma, that's where these aeons, creator gods, if you want to call them that, exist, that create and come up with experiments, and the experiments then are released into the arms of the surrounding galaxies. They promulgate and connect with the dusty plasma and find planets and habitats and begin to do their thing. Just like if you were to buy a bunch of sea monkeys in a mail order catalog, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that. They do these sea monkey experiments, and we're one of them. And of course, in this case, Sophia became entered into the experiment. But what you find out is that if you view that, if you're willing to explore that with me in the webinar, you realize that
Yes.
that the Earth, when Sophia turned into the Earth, it wasn't the Earth like instantly. It congealed out of that more fluid form of plasma and into the Earth, and gradually formed the continents, gradually turned into the world that we have right now. But it had to be prepared for that for a long, long time. The life of an aeon is literally one day in the life of an aeon is 26,000 years in the comparative life of a human being, right? So just to give you an idea of scale. So if Sophia is living, has congealed into the Earth and is basically now coming to, she's left. It's like you were in a dream, and now you wake up, and you're like, what was that? What was all that? I just dreamt. It's like what was going on? Except that dream was far more powerful. You can imagine, because she brought with her the entire code for the existence of a whole species, an anthropine species, which is humanity, including the habitat that she created for it. And so that habitat began to kind of congeal, and that congealing process happened in stages. And so what you have at a certain point is that once the Earth was shaped and ready for mankind to emerge on it in a suitable environment, millions of years or billions of years, possibly, if we don't really even know. There's estimates according to the relativity theory and the Big Bang theory, but let's just forget them because they've been debunked so easily. We can just forget that. The universe is eternal. Let's just accept it. It has no beginning, it has no end. So we don't know how long it's been here, but it's been here a long, long time. And there's no point in trying to define how long the Earth has existed. It's existed, let's just say, whatever, a few billion years. And in that course of time, it's created these separate, stages in its evolution to prepare for mankind to have that habitat where it could thrive. And part of that has to do with something that we now identify as, like the Schumann frequencies and the magnetosphere and the plasmasphere. All these things formed, right? And they all are energetic. They're energy. They're plasma, and they're pure energy. And the way they're like, like the ionosphere has, there's millions of volts per meter up in the ionosphere, but it descends all the way down to the surface, so that when you hit the surface of the Earth, we obviously couldn't live in millions of volts of energy per square meter. But right now, the energy per square meter on our surface, for example, is 100 volts, right? So we have 100 volts per meter, and rising upwards toward the ionosphere and getting more and more strong. And so that electricity that's in the universe is a particular environment. And so that environment, that electrical environment, if you understand that electricity is the driver of the universe and not gravity, electricity has a power that's 10 to the power of 39. That's 10 with 39 zeros following it, more powerful than gravity. Okay. Electromagnetic force is way, way more powerful. So it was the electromagnetic force that created that, Sophia made use of when she became the Earth. And so the electromagnetic spectrum on the Earth hasn't always been the same. That's the clue. That's the clue here. And so what you have is you find out that, that plays a big role on something that people know of as epigenetics. They talk about genetics, they talk about how, you know, there's been moments in time where our chromosomes suddenly mutated quickly. And most people use that as an example to say extraterrestrials came here and, you know, sewed around on the DNA, changed a couple things here and there, and then, you know, put us back in, and you know, so that we would become whatever, slaves. Most of it is connected to something called the master slave meme, right? The
Yeah.
master ideology, right? This ideology that we are actually, goes right again back to this false form of Gnosticism, where they're talking about us being slaves on a prison planet, right? I am not a slave, you know. I'm sorry. You can be a slave if you want, but I was not made as a slave. And I can prove to you, and I show you absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Anunnaki theory of manipulation of the genetics is bogus, or is at least, I'll tell you, the version that I provide you with to explain what really happened is equally as valid, if not much more valid, because I can actually prove it to you empirically. I didn't just channel it or interpret it from some Sumerian tablets incorrectly and pass it along and have the lie go through, you know, 20 generations of misinformation.
Mm. Yeah. And one of the things you get into in that section is, you know, I'll leave this for people. They can watch it to find out more. But, you know, like, did humans and dinosaurs exist at the same time? You know, and of course there is Sophia doing, you know, creating many beings as experiments. You know, and I
Yeah.
guess some are not still here. And that actually, when I look back at history and you start thinking, wow, some of these Egyptian gods were, well, they're not really human exactly. Maybe they existed. You know, and with the Earth not always being the same, I think that really lends to understanding the pyramids a bit more, because people have many theories as to what they are. But I think for those theories to actually be testable, like, we'll turn the pyramid back on, you need a different electric reality for the planet. Like when I
Yes.
see the Grand Canyon, I think, well, there's a great big plasma arc, you know,
Right.
and that's very obvious. You just look at it and then look at plasma arcs and you'll say, that's a plasma arc. Well, we don't quite have that kind of action happening today, you know, but obviously
Right.
we did in the past. So, you know, if we had a previous electrosphere, you know, electric reality, then the pyramids, like, what do you think they'd be doing, you know?
Well, I think we're talking about an area of anthropology that talks about the evolution of civilizations, and the fact that there's been civilizations which have come and gone that we know nothing about. They never left a
Yeah.
trace. And so what most people think were the builders of the pyramids, there are people that are saying, no, they weren't the builders. They were the ones that came later. And the actual builders
Hmm.
of the pyramids, we're not really sure who they were, but they were the civilization that directly preceded them. And what I'm saying is that if we tie in this element of energetics and plasma cosmology, we realize that not even they may have been the builders of the pyramids.
Yeah.
That the electromagnetic environment on the Earth at the time that the pyramids would have been most effective precedes even those time periods. We're talking, you know, potentially millions of years back. And because
Yeah.
stones cannot be age dated, unless there's some kind of organic element found within the stone that can then be analyzed, they could, you know, we don't really know how old a lot of these artifacts truly are. So we can't, you know, the reason that most of the time they're dated based on what they think is culturally going on. They can
Hmm.
find the traces of some culture through their literature, through their paintings or artwork or sculptures or whatever, and they say, there we find this bit. That means they must have been living there, and, you know, draw the conclusion they were the ones that made it. Yeah, but, you know, that's a weak premise if that's all you have to go on, because there's plenty of languages that we've found on the Earth which have never been deciphered yet, which means that there are civilizations, remnants of them on our planet, which we know nothing about. And so,
Mm.
you know, it's good to leave your mind open here and
Yeah.
realize that Sophia, as a plasmic torrent who turned into, you know, this atomic matter to create this planet, she was making use of these plasmic torrents, just like, for her, like the Gnostics say, like, everything is material. That means that emotions are material. You know, when you have an emotion,
Mm.
well, the emotion of nature is expressed in wind or thunderstorms or lightning bolts. Well, in a planetary sized being like Sophia, emotions in the early stage could be plasmic torrents that rip giant parts of the earth out and ejected it up into space, and and all kinds of stuff that it could have taken place that we've never tried to explain, because science has literally canceled plasma cosmology 100 years ago with the onslaught of the Einsteinian version of reality, right? So we have all that to rediscover, and I make a good attempt in the webinar to try and put some of those pieces together based on some of the material that we brought into a DVD that we produced with our friend Klaus Dona, because he's an out-of-place artifacts researcher, and much of the material that he finds is exactly that. He'll find artifacts, they say, well, we know that the earliest known civilization that we know of in Mexico is 5,000, 6,000 years old. And we know what the culture, what their culture was. We know what they wrote. We know what their artwork was. But these artifacts, they don't fit into anything that we know about. So that means these artifacts predate those periods by magnitudes of we don't know, and because they're stone, they could be going back millions of years. So there are actual depictions of humans living with dinosaurs. And I that in terms of the Sophianic mysteries. And it makes a lot more sense when you look at the plasma cosmology. Suddenly, what we thought when we brought out that film with Klaus, it was like, yeah, that is really weird stuff. Yeah. How did, what, who made that? Like, we just were shaking our heads, right? Well, I'm saying, guess what? This fits actually into a new cosmology that's based on something that's been lost and canceled. And that's what I tried to do and piece together for us.
Yeah, and that is really that part alone is so amazing in the webinar, because you look at these artifacts and you think, wow, did someone make that recently? They're pristine and amazing, and some of the ways that they react to infrared light, and you start thinking like, well, who knew what that was thousands of years ago? It's quite. It's really something to see. It's very valuable. That part of the webinar gives you a lot to think about.
Sure. And it fits completely with what the Gnostics were talking about with the origin of humanity, Orion. I mean, like you find like, oh my God, like, yeah, they are looking there. It's like, why are they looking there, right? Why not someplace else? Well, they are looking there because, and why is the serpent, the cobra appearing in South America, even though it's not native to that area? Well, there's a reason for it, because the serpent, we know who the serpent is. So, at a certain time on the earth, people knew this stuff.
Yes.
And that culture, we're saying that there's a global culture based on the artifactual evidence. So this would make absolute sense in the Sophianic perspective, that there was once a global culture that shared. And if you look at these artifacts, these megalithic artifacts, they're all over the world, and nobody can explain them, because why? They're still trying to explain them in a conventional form. What they need to do is drop that and look at it in the new cosmology, which I'm trying to introduce us to. And it's just baby steps. We could, this is just the start as far as I'm concerned, but I think it's a solid start to actually show us that this is a new avenue of research, a new direction of study that we can go into, which is empirically validated and scientifically sound. It's not just, woo-woo, whatever. It's not, it's like, it's actually real. Put your hands on it. And you can still do the, psychogenic trips if you want, and to verify, if that's how you want to verify the information, be my guest. And people have done that, Terence McKenna being one of the most popular psychonauts on the planet that discovered many of these aspects of Sophia and the serpent existent, in those other realms, that actually had direct communication and met with him, right? I mean, literally, all of us, let's just not forget, we're all in an altered state. Even if you do a psychogenic plant and you enter in an extreme altered state, when you're back in your normal state, you're still in an altered state. And what you're confronted with out there in reality is Sophia meeting you. So people say, oh, I met with Sophia. No, it doesn't work that way. You meet Sophia, and that you and the sense that you identify that she is everything around you. The reason you're living in her dream. So whatever you're perceiving, that is Sophia. You just have to understand that that's where you meet, and that's and that's what you do with the perception and your realization of that intimate connection with the
Mm.
planetary intelligence that will determine, what your part here is going to be. If it's going to be an extra, or if it's going to be a main role. It's up to you. You're the singularity. You can decide if you want to poke your head in the sand or follow the archons, or you can decide if you want to be a major player. It's up to you. You have, it's there. It might not be
Wow.
easy, but it's there, right?
Oh, it's absolutely there. Yeah, and that's kind of the heart of animism right there. So Nacumius, the next section, you go into orbs a lot, and I think one thing about the pyramids, I think it's why they're so in everyone's consciousness, why they're so mystical, why so many archaeologists try to figure them out, why everyone on Earth kind of knows what they are as far as that they exist. There's something about them that calls to us, because really they're not that interesting in and of themselves. Like, look, it's a big thing, right? But and somebody
Right.
made it. It's what it is that I think captivates humanity, because we remember something.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome. It's like, like you stand, literally, awe is the word here. You're standing
Mhm.
in front of them and awe, like, oh my God, like,
Ah,
and that form of awe opens you up to higher dimensions of perception. I
yes.
ultimately can trigger an experience. And I know many people that have been in, or not many, but let's just say I know people that have been inside of these structures that have had these aha moments, right? And the key here is when you're having those aha moments is to be neutral, because unfortunately, many of the people that I mean, those who I know that have had those aha moments, they tend to lean on the the spiritual narrative that is widely known, to get a reference point. And that is a
Yeah.
mistake. That's one thing I appreciate about John Lash, is because he actually steps outside of that whole framework and presents the
Oh,
information in a neutral fashion. This is what was said. No, it wasn't trying to, we're not trying to find ways that the messages that can conform to the biblical narrative that took place, thousands of years later. No, we're actually looking at it as, what it is, really what is it prima facie that you're experiencing here. And so when those experiences happen in front of pyramids, that's what should happen to you if you stay neutral. You should open yourself up to this, what I call phylogenetic memory. Now, the orbs, the orbs are a fascinating subject, and the orbs was actually again, like, it's funny. I always end up, the last part of the webinar is actually the point of entry for me for even wanting to do the webinar, because once I discovered, because I've known about the orbs, and many people perceive orbs on a
mhm.
microscopic level. There's lots of pictures of orbs. There's
Yes.
people. I mean, I'm together with you could say the Orbs Queen. Tanya Maidenford. I
Mhm.
mean, she was made it to the cover of UFO magazine as the Orbs Queen.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and years ago, and orbs are all around us. But there's also these other forms of orbs that are, that have appeared all throughout history. And I stumbled on some academic papers in the Journal of Modern Physics that were actually identifying this reality of the orbs. And, it was a shock to me, because I realized here were academic papers that were literally describing the UFO experience. And nobody was talking about it. It was like, just like I found this, interesting book about what the Germans discovered when they busted into Poland at the consulate, these massive communications between Roosevelt and the English government and the French government through William C. Bullitt to find a way to get the Germans into the war and to block any negotiations and make sure
Mhm.
there's no peaceable end to the striving of what the Germans were after, which was, the outgoing point of why I even wanted to do that webinar, which led to Gnosticism. This aspect of orbs is so revolutionary that I had to, of course, put it into the proper framework for you to even understand that what these people are talking about in the modern journal, the Journal of Modern Physics, is legitimate from the perspective of plasma cosmology. Otherwise, even these people are shaking their heads going, we know it's plasma, but and it acts like it's intelligent, weird, right? Well, I'm trying to say, yeah, it's doing it. What's exactly what it should do. If it is all this, we're living in this plasma sea, this in various
Mhm.
states of congealment. Then, and everything is plasma. Then these orbs, of course, they're entities. Of course, they behave the way they do, and of course, they've been interacting with mankind since the beginning.
Weak there
And
for.
here, yeah, the problem is that, just like I've been saying, people get the information and they try to get a frame of reference
Yes.
for what they're going through. And what frame of reference do they take? Well, they take the frame of reference that's called the origin myth. And the
Yes.
origin myth with respect to their experience with orbs, in modern history starts with the Second World War, right? With the identification of the word UFO, unidentified flying objects, and then later, morphed into the abduction scenario where there was visitations, and the visitations led to an interaction between humans and those orbs, right? And both of those experiences have what's called the origin myth. And once one of those origin myths has been documented, then all subsequent experiences use it as a reference point. And so they define their experiences not on what they're seeing, really, not in reality, but on the overlay of the origin myth. And that's what their reference point is. And so what I'm showing in this webinar is extremely controversial and it's probably extremely irritating for many people in ufology, because they like to attribute all those craft, as they call them out there, to extraterrestrial, or the other side is the secret space program, right? But let's face it, they believe that there's many forms of extraterrestrials that are inhabiting those craft, and that's what we're seeing up there, and they're interacting with them and they're responding to those who are trying to force the interaction. But I'm saying all of that is completely natural, but it doesn't require the belief in extraterrestrial presence. It's actually something which I believe is far more mystical and far more powerful, but because it's been obfuscated by the origin myth in both the form of the ufology as well as the abduction scenarios, and it's also been contaminated by the government's meddling in the technology of plasma and in the form of MK Ultra, which is, which basically puts over top, the simulation, the archontic, again,
Yes.
simulation of experience that traumatizes people. So that experience has been contaminated. So unfortunately, the true reference of what's going on out there needs to start from the perspective of these academic papers. We need to go back a step. And so that's what I'm doing in the last part of the webinar. I'm actually showing us that, this actually didn't start with the Second World War or after the Second World with the Foo Fighters, etc. This goes back to the Gnostics, because I can actually show us that there was a original, experience with extraterrestrial beings, but they are not, ETs from another world. They're archons. And the archons began meddling in human affairs from the minute they got here. And because they were here first, the archons were around before the earth was around. And that's one thing people don't understand. But, the people that don't really read into the material. But if you really do want to understand that Gnostic material, you should look at all of it, right? Because, people are out there now saying, I just saw, something on Inspired, somebody, I won't mention her name, but saying that she saw the owner of this planet, and then she did research and she found out who it was. It was Yaldabaoth. And I'm like, oh, really? They went to the Gnostic material and they didn't go to the full, all of it. And if they would have really done their research, they would have understood that Yaldabaoth ain't the owner of this planet. In fact, he might pretend. If anything, it's a
Yes.
pretender. The total idea of the archons is pretense. So they're great pretenders and they're great at mimicking things. And if they can get us to believe that they're the owners of this planet, then they have won. They've done a great job. If they can get us to believe that, what we're seeing out there, that it's inevitable, that, whatever happens out there with respect to AI and all this shit, that's the kind of stuff that they want us to believe so that they can bring us into their world, because they can't enter our world, our reality. And so it's sad when I see that, because it distorts the picture of the world. But, you can't stop it. You can't stop those people from having that experience. And you certainly can't stop them from talking about what they believe they saw. I'm just trying to create a counter, an antidote for the point.
Yeah.
And I can show us that there's empirical evidence. I'm not just telling you this stuff because I had this dream and I left my body and I encountered, that's great. That's one form of experience. But you have to, one thing that the shamans, the intellectual shamans, the Telestai did is they didn't stop there. They brought it back and they worked on it intellectually as well. And they mapped it out in terms of, empirical evidence and other forms of proof. You just can't work on only one element of experience. You have to bring it together with several disciplines. And that's one of the things that's really important. And that's one of the things I really do. I really tried to do in the webinar is to actually show those different perspectives so that it isn't just my own personal bias, that isn't confirmation bias. It's actually, validated in multiple disciplines. And in the end, of course, you need to go inside and see if it resonates with you. And if you can do something with that, and if you can connect to, if you get past the veil of distortion and get to the point of what those orbs really are, this could open up a whole new form of a whole new chapter of communication.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the Foo Fighters, that they've always been so interesting. I can only imagine, like 19-year-old kids, and a whole 19-year-old crew. They were quite young, disturbingly young, flying, in the B-24, the B-17, and you've got these little balls of light following you. I mean,
Yeah.
I've always wondered. I would love to find. There's not many alive, but people who were on those planes. Like, what experience did they have? Because we know that little Foo Fighters existed, but what did those crews experience? Because, and that's, if there's anybody out there who was on one of those planes and you saw the Foo Fighters, give me a call. Let me know.
They described some of it, Craig. They actually left those records and described it. And so, I talk about some of that, and it's actually talked about in the academic papers, which are these peer-reviewed papers are like they're solid, right? So there's accounts of the people that had those experiences.
Oh, okay, I didn't know.
And I can tell you what they experienced, Craig.
What did they experience? Yeah,
they experienced a range that went from this disorientation and nausea all the way to visions of angels and even extraterrestrials. Okay. And that makes total sense. Why? Because they were put into an altered state of consciousness. Why? Because those orbs are plasma, and plasma, like I said, is electric, and the electromagnetic force is 10 to the power of 30 times more powerful than the force of gravity. And so what happens is when they come in proximity of people, those people enter into altered states because, as Michael Persinger, who we had in our film Solar Revolution, proved with his God helmet experience, when you put electromagnetic charges in certain locations near people's brain, they can induce these altered states of consciousness. They can induce a spiritual vision. They can induce an abduction experience. This is all doable without any use of any psychotropic drugs whatsoever, strictly with the use of electromagnetic pulsing. And so these plasmoids that were hanging out in the environment around these, pilots, well, they are creating, of course, these hallucinatory visions, and the pilots would see those things which were their frame of reference. So if they came from a highly religious family that believed that Jesus was going to come and save the world and is going to return, well, guess what? When they went into the altered state, they might actually see a light and see Jesus there, and Jesus spoke to them. And that's what they bring back from their experience. And the next guy over in the plane beside him, he doesn't believe that. He actually believes that, Satan rules the world, and he encounters Satan. And, it's like everybody will encounter what's relative to what they have connected with in the field. So because all these memories and all these experiences and beliefs that people have, they're actually put into the plasmic field, into what's called the Akashic record. So whether they're true or not, they're put into the field, and we humans can reference that material, just like you're downloading it from a hard drive. You come to a friend's hard drive who's been researching a certain subject, and you begin to poke around in what they found. Well, that's what you find. You find what they've researched and stored on their hard drive. Well, the plasma that's out there, the Akasha, is kind of like that. It stores this information, and it's not necessarily all good information. It's information that's relative to what humans have put in there. And so your own evolutionary state, what you're into, what you believe, will trigger what you see.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I imagine these poor characters in the in the bombers, heading over to kill people. All of a sudden, they've all taken a big handful of mushrooms, just to make the experience that much more intense. As if it
Right.
wasn't intense enough. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it was lethal in some cases. It led to crashes, and
Really?
some
Oh
planes
wow.
crashed. Some of them blew up. Yeah, because I mean, these things they toyed with them. They
Mm.
toy with them. They toy with them because they're attracted to the positive charge, right? These, once mankind left the ground and went into the atmosphere, starting at that time period, that's when we began seeing the UFOs like on a regular basis. Before that, there were historical events which are documented in strange, obscure paintings and whatnot. But once we entered the environment, the air around us, above us, right, just below the ionosphere and the stratosphere and below, we essentially began charging the atmosphere with, on one hand, with certain positive ions versus negative ions, drawing the cathode anode analogy again, that these orbs have been shown to descend, and literally come down and hang out in the area that pilots fly in because they're attracted to that energy polarity. And so that's, when we began entering into the atmosphere, we began detonating bombs. I mean, we added a whole level of violence to that medium that was never there before. And then suddenly everyone says, well, suddenly these UFOs began appearing over the atomic nuclear sites because, we think it's because mankind detonated atomic I used to believe that too, but now there's a better explanation. No,
Yeah.
it wasn't because the ETs noticed on the other side of the galaxy that we're detonating atomic bombs. Because believe me, there's atomic explosions going on between us and the other side of the universe that are quadrillion times more powerful than what we could manage to do here on the Earth. Because that argument right there kind of cancels it out. But the thing is, what's going on is that we're charging the atmosphere with this new energy, and that energy attracts these orbs. And I talk about it in great detail. And that's why I think it's important for people to do the webinar, because it explains a lot to you that you can kind of chalk it off.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, and everything that we're speaking of here, definitely is more, more covered, better covered in the webinar. So if it sparks one's interest, the get the webinar, because it's all there. And it does. It reminded me when we talked about the pyramids that and experiencing them. There is a musician, Paul Horn, who did a recording. It's all analog originally, so I like that. It was called "Inside the Great Pyramid." I guess they actually, when it was easier to get in the Great Pyramid, they took a bunch of instruments in there and just did this like hour-long improvisational session. And anyway, I've always thought you get the feeling of the Great Pyramid when you listen to it. I've always found it to be slightly an eclectic experience. And when it comes to plasma, these little pictures here, this is the atomic, the very genesis, beginning of atomic explosions from the Cold War era. And I couldn't find some of the pictures I was looking for, but when you see the nucleus of the atomic explosion, you actually see it has it looks like a brain in a way. You have these like neural pathways. And Joseph Farrell, he wrote that when we started making those explosions, the nuclear explosions, we were opening up a gateway, and orbs, plasma beings, would come through those because they'd sort of be like sucked in. It wasn't always that they meant to be here, but they ended up like, oh crap, where am I? Here I am.
It's like they're just attracted by the charge. It's like it's like a precipitation. Again, it's this analogy of mist to a precipitation of a dewdrop. They literally are. It's a natural process where they begin to appear, but they aren't. It isn't. See, the thing is, again, people like Farrell use words like a portal, etc., like that. Well, it implies, again, that something from outside is coming in. But I'm saying is no. It's all been here all along. It's the inside coming out. It's not the outside coming in. So everything's been turned on its head. So these phenomenon that are taking place and why they're taking place has never really been explained properly. And people are still dumbfounded at these UFO hearings, like just the other day, we have a film now of one of those TikTok things cruising along, and we fired a missile at it, and look what happens when the missile hit it. It just, splintered the missile and kept going. And
Yes, I saw that.
I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I would expect from a electromagnetic powerful orb that just sucked in the energy of the missile and spit it back out and said, "Thank you very much. That was a nice little gumdrop." And that's exactly what plasma would do. And there's some amazing information in the webinar about and experiences that people have made films of, and things that we even had a remote viewer. I pulled a remote viewer. It's another form of empirical evidence, right? You can't completely rely on remote viewers. I always say that. Everyone's like, "Oh, the remote viewer said that." But if you add the remote viewer experience to all the other pieces, then it makes it really interesting. And when you watch the webinar, you're going to experience that in a couple of occasions, and it'll literally blow your mind. I think
it is very mind-blowing. And for people to know, like with the remote viewer, they weren't giving any information. No, they weren't given any information. They were just given a number. So they really are blind to what they're seeing. And when you hear what the person is seeing, it's very, very mind-blowing. I think once again, it goes beyond chance. You have to just toss it out the window. It's not that they just got lucky or that they were kind of led with questions or something like that. No, they really, it is something else. It's powerful. And then I've had you forever, but the last part, well, I will mention that there's a Kordylewski clouds that you go into, and that could be where our collective memory is. That's definitely something
right.
to,
well, it builds, right? It builds from, what is plasma and what is plasma cosmology. And it ends going through the full spectrum of the history of the Earth, these mysterious orbs, what are they? How do they relate to the whole thing? And then culminates in the most newest discovery. And I think I'm probably one of the very first to, I probably, if not the first, to actually tie the Kordylewski clouds into the Gnostic narrative.
Yes.
I spent some time with John Lash. It was the last thing I did before I actually put together the webinars, go to hang with him, and we talked about it. And it's the only other person that is that actually talks about it is just the guy who appears in the webinar as one of my experts, Robert Temple, who posits the idea of the clouds based on material that he put together with another scientist called Chandra Wickrama Singh, I think is his last name. It's one of those. Why do the Indians always have such complicated names? But
I know.
Let's just call him Chandra. Chandra was the astrophysicist, the mathematician, and what it is in a nutshell is people have discovered. The name Kordylewski goes back to the 60s, where this Polish scientist discovered these plasma clouds in our Earth-Moon system. And he documented it, and people thought he was crazy. And for many decades, they were just kind of put off as someone's hallucination. And it wasn't until modern times, just a few years ago, that scientists began to take up that problem again, that puzzle, that mystery, and they discovered, lo and behold, wow, they were real, right? So it was Chandra from a Singh who went through and based on the readings they actually did readings on these things, brought back some data, and it was his mathemageniuses, that got together and calculated based on known plasma physics with respect to density. We find out that plasma, has very, very interesting qualities, and I described many of them in the webinar, of course. But one of them is the fact that plasma forms crystals.
Yes.
And so, you can extrapolate. Everyone that has crystals will say, well, what do crystals do? What do people use crystals for when they meditate? Right? Everyone has their favorite crystal with them when they're in some place. Why? Because crystal is a way of amplifying, receiving, storing memory and information. Mm-hmm. And so here we have the foundation of a form of plasma crystal which could store memory. And that's one thing that Chandra Wickrama Singh and Robert Temple work out in a particular paper, which I stumbled on. So I asked Robert about all this stuff, right? And I asked him about the peer-reviewed papers that I found on the Journal of Modern Physics. And He even knew some of the people that were part of the studies. And we talked at length about why nobody knows about, why isn't anyone talking about this stuff? It's like right out there in the open. It answers many, many of the questions that people have about, UFOs, and no one's looking at it. Why? Well, it's probably because plasma is such a verboten subject that if you embrace the plasma physics and the cosmology, you realize that it would probably turn, first of all, physics on its head. Second of all, you would have an explanation for what the scientists that are behind the secret programs, which probably are the real secret programs that are developing, technology which seems to look like UFOs when we see it and perceive it in the atmosphere, would not want us to know about. Because, and that's why we theorized in the webinar, like what is it that would stop them from releasing the information? So you're gonna have to watch the webinar if you want that answer. But essentially, the clouds, I won't say more than that. You should really watch it, because the cloud, what I posit is something I don't think anyone has posited yet. I think this is pioneering stuff. Even Robert was blown away when I was reading him some of my theories, and he's like, yeah, absolutely, this could be totally so. So I build on what I posit in the hypothesis using real science and other things, including remote viewing, and to kind of piece it together and to show us that really what we have here is the potential for a place that some people might call heaven.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the physical form, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about the Kordylewski clouds is that now you'll see them talked about in astronomy magazine. So now, as far as what they are, well, that's what you're figuring out, or we're figuring out. But the fact that they exist physically, well, that's just common knowledge now.
They are is now a real thing. It's what they are that has now become interesting.
It is
what, and of course, scientists won't go in the metaphysical Gnostic direction that I'm taking this in, but let them, it's interesting because it always correlates, somehow they make a discovery, like, for example, the idea that there's crystals, that these crystals form massive structures based on being charged. And these crystals have a particular shape. And, it ties totally into the solar wind. It ties into our ecosystem of the solar system. And it gives us a holistic picture of the entire solar system, like, of our life here, extending it out into these paranormal realms with real viable physical, descriptions of what's going on around us. And that it's actually, it's actually a relief in a lot of ways to know that we are connected to that ecosystem, and that people wonder what happens after you die, etc. All these questions are kind of addressed in the webinar at the very end.
Oh yeah, it all wraps up at the end. But
don't watch the end first. Watch the first part and go to the end.
Yeah, because it really needs to be watched in context, in that order. And that's a great reason to cultivate our animism. Is crystals do have an energy, and all one has to do is practice your animism, get good at it, and the crystal will tell you what it's doing. It's no secret. And so, I've had you forever. And the last section, what's the last section titled? I didn't know.
Nuocumulus. That's the part. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I didn't. Somehow.
No worries. I put the pronunciation underneath, but I mean, even then, it isn't easy, right?
Yeah.
It's just I have this weird habit of wanting to give my webinar parts a single word title.
It works.
That encompasses what each of them mean, right?
It absolutely, and it works. It really does. And so the last section, and I've had you forever, so I won't keep you much longer. But and we'll kind of leave it as a little bit of a cliffhanger. I kind of like that. So you don't have to answer this to any great extent or even at all. But in the last section, it gets into, do the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal a deeper, darker past tied to mythical distortions still at play today? And the Gnostics, this is what I'm mentioning, the Gnostics definitely had a counter to the usual narrative on what the Dead Sea Scrolls are and what was happening energetically in that area. And the Gnostics saw the Abrahamic covenant as, and maybe it was the original covenant, an archonic program that could also be called an infection. And the early, like if you look at our Gnostic shamans, they actually were archonic counterintelligence at one point. And so maybe that's
Absolutely.
a good cliffhanger for everybody. If you want to know the answer to that one, well, you got to get the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, those Gnostics were they even called themselves the Archontics. I'll say that.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that they called themselves that, and there's a reason that they all sort of congealed at the Dead Sea at this place that's 430 meters, about 1,300 feet below sea level. And I explained in the webinar why that has a significance. And
Yes.
and trust me, it's the wildest story that that draws on this, you know, powerful Gnostic intel that, you know, we have people like John Lash to thank for, but it builds on it, and, you know, tying in the material that was given to us through Robert Temple's, you know, A New Science of Heaven, that explores, you know, this much more, adding in the metaphysical elements to it. So really it gives the whole idea of the Archontics and what was going on at the Dead Sea right at that time, you know, 150 BC, right? You know, during that whole, there were all these wars that were going, the Maccabean situation, there were UFO sightings in those areas. And I explain why there were UFO sightings, and I explain what is behind those UFO sightings. Of course, building up, you know, as a result of, you know, what we've learned about plasma and what we've learned about, you know, the extended reality of Earth. So I'll leave it at that. It's definitely a climactic end, I would say, to, you know, to the present time, because it literally bridges right to our present time from that point right to now.
Yes, absolutely does.
It's a teleportation device.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. Well, Frank Jacob, you know, thank you for being on Radiant Creators again, you know, and I'm this new webinar. It's amazing. I'm sure I'll watch it again and get even more from it. It's been great talking to you. And so, Frank Jacob, where can people find you? In general, they go to CyberHive TV. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if people are still watching, I'd be happy. Then, yeah, you can watch on cyberhive.tv is where the master classes are. If you can't spell that properly or don't remember it, just if you know my name,
Frank Jacob.
frankjacob.com, Frank with a K, Jacob with a C. You know, people spell it the other way around too. And it's not Jacob Frank, like, you know, the Frankists, you know, but it's frankjacob.com. And you'll find at the top of that menu on that website links directly to CyberHive and films and everything that, you know, all the other good stuff that's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right there. You know, Frank Jacob is not hard to find. And of course, if you're watching this or listening to it, it's in the show notes. So I'm going to end the stream now. Okay.